Chapter 1. The Exile. The last thing Clara Hartley heard before the door slammed was her stepmother's voice, cold and final. "You're not welcome here anymore." November wind cut through her thin jacket as she stood on the gravel driveway of the house she'd grown up in. Behind her, the two-story farmhouse sat warm and lit, her father's silhouette visible in the kitchen window, turning away, refusing to look. Clara was 23 years old. She had 62 pounds in her pocket, the clothes she was wearing, and a canvas backpack containing a water bottle, her phone with 15% battery, and a woolly hat her grandmother had knitted before she died. That was it. Everything else, her books, her laptop, the wooden box with her mother's jewelry, photographs, her winter coat, all of it locked inside the house she was no longer allowed to enter. "Dad!" She tried one last time, her voice breaking. "Please." But Richard Hartley had made his choice. 3 years ago, he'd married Patricia, a woman with 2 grown sons and a talent for manipulation. Slowly, methodically, Patricia had poisoned him against his own daughter. Clara was wasteful, ungrateful, disrespectful. A burden he'd carried long enough. The truth was simpler and uglier. Patricia wanted Clara's inheritance. The trust fund Clara's mother had left her, inaccessible until she turned 25. The farmland that would one day be Clara's. Patricia had been working on Richard for years, and tonight, something had finally broken. A fabricated argument about Clara stealing money from Patricia's purse. Accusations Clara couldn't disprove. Her father's face, harder than she'd ever seen it. "Get out! Don't come back." Now she stood in the darkening afternoon, watching her breath cloud in the freezing air. The Scottish Highlands stretched around her, rolling hills, dense forests, miles of emptiness. The nearest town, Invergarry, was 8 miles down a single-track road. She had no car, no friends nearby. Her mobile phone had no signal this far from civilization. Clara could walk to town. Probably. 8 miles in the growing dark, temperature dropping below freezing, wearing a jacket meant for autumn not winter. She might make it. Or she could head into the forest. It was a mad thought. Suicidal, even. She had no supplies, no shelter, no experience with wilderness survival beyond childhood camping trips with her father, back when he'd still been her father, before Patricia. But something in Clara rebelled against walking toward town, toward the humiliation of begging for help from people who'd watched her family fall apart and done nothing, toward a homeless shelter or a cold church hall, waiting for social services to process her case. The forest offered something else. Solitude. The chance to think without eyes on her, without pity or judgment. Clara turned away from the house and walked toward the tree line. The forest began abruptly, a wall of Scots pine and birch that had stood for centuries. Clara had played here as a child, knew the paths and deer trails. She walked until the house disappeared behind her, until the only sounds were wind in the branches and her own breathing. She found an old hunting blind, half collapsed but still offering some shelter from the wind. It would have to do for tonight. Clara pulled out her phone. 15% battery. No signal. She turned it off to preserve power and sat in the growing darkness, her back against rough wood, trying not to think about how cold it was getting. She thought instead about survival, about what she knew. Her grandmother had been a hill walker, tough as old boots. She'd taught Clara things, how to read the land, find water, recognize edible plants. "The Highlands will provide if you know how to look," she'd said. Her mother, before the cancer took her, had been a teacher who believed in practical skills. Clara could start a fire, purify water, build basic shelter. Theory, mostly, from books and YouTube videos watched during university breaks. Now she'd find out if theory was enough. As darkness fell completely, Clara made decisions. She couldn't stay in this blind, too exposed, too close to the road. Tomorrow, she'd go deeper. Find somewhere truly hidden. Build something better. If she survived the night, She pulled her grandmother's hat low over her ears, wrapped her arms around herself, and waited for dawn. The temperature dropped to -3. Clara didn't sleep, couldn't risk it. She did jumping jacks in the cramped space, flexed her fingers and toes, kept moving. When her body screamed for rest, she thought about Patricia's satisfied smile. Her father's turned back. She would not die to prove them right. When gray light finally filtered through the trees, Clara was exhausted but alive. Frost coated everything, turning the forest into something crystalline and merciless. She needed water, food, better shelter. She needed a plan. Clara stood, her joints protesting, and began walking deeper into the forest. Away from roads, away from people, toward something she couldn't yet name but felt pulling at her like gravity. 3 hours later, she found it. A small valley, hidden between two hills, protected from the worst winds. A stream ran through it, fast-flowing, unlikely to freeze completely. Dense pine coverage overhead. Rocky outcrops that could provide natural shelter. Most importantly, invisible from any path or road. You'd never find this place unless you were looking, and even then, you'd walk right past it. Clara stood at the edge of the valley and felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly. Something harder. More determined. If they wouldn't give her a home, she'd build one. Here. Hidden. Hers. She had no tools, no materials, no money for supplies. What she had was time, desperation, and the forest itself. It would have to be enough. Clara found a fallen log and sat down, her mind already working through problems. She'd need shelter, water source, fire, food, warmth. Basic survival first. Then she could think about something more permanent. She spent the rest of the day exploring the valley, cataloging resources. Deadfall wood everywhere, branches and logs she could use for construction. The stream, cold and clear. Pine trees with low branches she could cut for shelter. Rocky overhangs that might work as foundations. As the sun set on her first full day alone, Clara built a small fire using dry pine needles and her last book of matches, an emergency pack she'd forgotten in her backpack pocket. She boiled stream water in her metal water bottle, made it safe to drink. She ate nothing. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she'd survive a few days without food. Water and shelter came first. That night, she slept under a crude lean-to made from pine branches, the fire burning low beside her. She woke every hour to feed it, to keep the cold at bay. By the third day, Clara had a routine. Wake before dawn. Rebuild the fire. Boil water. Scout for materials. Work on shelter. Sleep in short bursts. By the 5th day, she'd built something more substantial, a proper debris hut with a framework of branches, packed with pine needles and moss for insulation. Small, barely big enough to lie down in, but it held heat. She woke without frost on her eyebrows. By the 7th day, she'd found food. Rose hips still clinging to wild bushes. Pine nuts from fallen cones. She set a snare using wire from an old fence she'd found, caught a rabbit. The meat tasted better than anything she'd ever eaten. By the 10th day, Clara realized something. She wasn't dying. She was surviving. And somewhere in the process, she'd stopped being the girl who'd been thrown out. She was becoming something else. Someone who could endure. Chapter 2. The Builder. Winter arrived in earnest during Clara's 3rd week in the forest. Snow fell steadily, blanketing the valley in white silence. The temperature dropped to -10 at night. Most people would have died. Clara thrived. She'd spent 2 weeks preparing for this. Her debris hut had evolved into something more permanent, a small cabin built against a rocky outcrop, using deadfall logs chinked with moss and clay from the streambed. The rock face formed one wall, holding heat. A stone fireplace vented smoke up through a carefully constructed chimney. It was crude, barely 6 feet by 8 feet inside, but it was warm. dry, hidden beneath pine boughs and positioned so the smoke dispersed through the canopy, invisible from any distance. Clara had learned to be invisible too. She moved through the forest like a ghost, checking snares, gathering firewood, hauling water from the stream. She saw hikers occasionally, distant figures on the ridge above her valley. They never saw her. She'd become excellent at not being seen. Her days followed a rhythm now. Wake with first light, tend the fire, check trap lines, gather materials, build, improve, rest, repeat. The cabin grew more sophisticated. She found an abandoned farm building 2 miles away, carefully salvaged nails and a rusty saw blade. With these tools, her construction improved dramatically. She built a raised sleeping platform, storage shelves, a proper door from split logs. She insulated the walls with layered pine needles, packed so thick the wind couldn't penetrate. She created a cold storage pit outside, digging down past the frost line to keep meat frozen naturally. Food was harder than shelter, but manageable. Snares brought rabbits. She learned to fish through ice, using cord and hooks made from carved bone. She'd found a small patch of wild garlic, harvested carefully to ensure it would grow back. Pine needle tea provided vitamin C, preventing scurvy. She rationed her catches, never taking more than the forest could replenish. This wasn't survival anymore. It was sustainable living. By week 5, Clara had lost 15 pounds, her body lean and hard with muscle. Her hands were calloused, her face weathered. She barely recognized herself in the reflection of the stream. She looked wild, competent, strong. Her phone had died in week 2. She'd buried it beneath a stone, a connection to a world she no longer belonged to. Time became measured in daylight and seasons, not hours and minutes. She thought about her father sometimes, late at night when the fire burned low. Wondered if he regretted his choice. Probably not. Patricia would have convinced him Clara had run away, was probably fine, probably just being dramatic. Let them think that. Let them forget her. Clara was building something they could never take away. One morning in early December, she woke to find fresh snow had collapsed part of her cabin's roof. Not catastrophic, but a reminder that winter was her real enemy, not her family. She spent 3 days rebuilding, improving the roof pitch, adding support beams. When she finished, the structure could handle twice the snow load. She stepped back and assessed her work. The cabin was roughly built, certainly not pretty, but it was functional. Warm. Secure. A home. Her home. As December progressed, Clara expanded her domain. She built a smokehouse for preserving meat, created a small root cellar for storing wild onions and garlic, constructed a woodshed to keep firewood dry. She found an old tarp in the abandoned farm building, used it to collect rainwater and snowmelt. She carved bowls from wood, made crude utensils, wove baskets from willow branches. Every item was hard-won. Every improvement took days of work. But each addition made survival easier, made the next project possible. By mid-December, Clara had what could genuinely be called a homestead. Primitive, isolated, invisible to the outside world, but functional. Sustainable. She could live here indefinitely. The realization hit her one evening as she sat by her fire, eating rabbit stew flavored with wild herbs. She'd done it. Built a life from nothing. Survived what should have killed her. Pride flickered in her chest, small and fierce. Then she heard voices. Clara froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Distant voices, coming from the ridge above her valley. Hikers, probably. They'd passed through before. But these voices weren't moving on. They were stationary. Searching. Clara. Clara Hartley. Her father's voice. Clara's heart stopped. She set down her bowl carefully, moved to her cabin door, peered out through a gap in the logs. Through the trees, perhaps half a mile away on the upper ridge, she could see figures. 4 of them. Her father. Patricia. 2 others she didn't recognize. Police, maybe, or search and rescue. Clara, if you can hear me, please come out. We're worried about you. Patricia's voice, carrying through the cold air. Fake concern dripping from every word. Clara's jaw clenched. Worried. They'd thrown her out 2 months ago, and now they were worried? She watched them search, moving along the ridge, calling her name. They were looking in the wrong place, too high up, too far from her hidden valley. They'd never find her unless she wanted to be found. After an hour, they gave up and left. Clara sat by her fire, mind racing. Why now? Why come looking after all this time? It didn't matter. They'd failed to find her, and she had no intention of revealing herself. Let them wonder. Let them worry. She'd survived without them. She'd continue surviving without them. The forest had become her family now. Chapter 3. The Search. The search parties came 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Clara watched from hiding each time. Her father looked haggard, older than his 56 years. Patricia maintained her concerned act, but Clara could read the calculation in her eyes. This wasn't about finding Clara. This was about something else. On the 4th search, Clara followed them from a distance, invisible among the trees. She'd become good at moving silently, at reading the forest. They crashed through undergrowth like bulls, completely unaware she was tracking them. She heard Patricia on her mobile, briefly within signal range. Don't care what it takes, find her. The solicitors won't release anything until... The signal dropped. Clara understood then. Her 25th birthday. 3 months away. Her mother's trust fund would become accessible, along with legal rights to the farmland. Patricia needed Clara found, or legally declared dead, to have any claim on the inheritance. This wasn't rescue. It was a hunt for assets. Clara faded back into the forest, back to her hidden valley. Let them search. They'd never find her. But the searches worried her. More people in the forest meant more chance of discovery. She needed to be more careful. She began covering her tracks obsessively. She moved her trap lines further from any paths. She only lit fires at night when smoke would be invisible. She cached supplies in multiple locations in case she needed to abandon her cabin. December became January. The searches stopped as weather worsened. Blizzards swept through the Highlands, making search operations impossible. Clara endured. Her cabin held against the storms. Her food stores kept her fed. She'd even made a crude calendar, scratching marks on a wooden board to track days. She was surviving a Scottish Highland winter alone, something people with modern equipment struggled to do. On a clear morning in mid-January, Clara woke to find fresh footprints in the snow outside her valley, boot prints, recent, from the ridge above. Someone had been close. Too close. She spent the day erasing evidence of her presence. She scattered pine needles over her most used paths. She disguised the cabin's outline with additional branches and snow. She moved her woodpile inside, eliminating the one obvious sign of habitation. That night, she didn't light a fire. She sat in darkness, wrapped in rabbit furs she'd cured, listening. Nothing. But the close call had rattled her. She'd grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable. The forest was protection, but it wasn't invulnerable. 3 days later, she heard it, a helicopter, low over the trees. Clara pressed herself against the rocky outcrop, watching through branches as the search helicopter made slow passes over the forest. Thermal imaging, probably. Looking for heat signatures. Her cabin's stone chimney and earth-backed walls diffused heat. She'd built it instinctively right, invisible not just to eyes but to thermal cameras. The helicopter circled for an hour, then departed. Clara waited until dark, then climbed to the ridge to scout. Fresh search markers flagged trees, orange ribbons marking search grid boundaries. They were being systematic now. Professional. Someone had money behind this search. Patricia, probably hiring private teams. Clara made a decision. She couldn't stay defensive. She needed information. The next morning, she hiked 8 miles to Invergary, moving carefully through pre-dawn darkness. She'd lost weight, her face was weathered, her hair long and unkempt. She looked nothing like the girl who'd been thrown out 3 months ago. She waited outside the village shop until it opened, then went inside. The owner, Mrs. McLeod, didn't recognize her. Clara bought a newspaper with hoarded coins, keeping her head down. The headline made her stomach drop. Local woman missing 3 months, birthday inheritance in question. The article was detailed. Clara Hartley, missing since November. Father Richard Hartley and stepmother Patricia desperate for her return. Police investigation ongoing. Legal experts quoted about inheritance law and presumption of death. There it was. Patricia's endgame. If Clara stayed missing past her 25th birthday, legal proceedings could declare her dead after 7 years. But there were provisions for earlier declarations in cases of compelling evidence. Patricia was building a case for Clara's death. The searches weren't about rescue. They were about establishing that she couldn't possibly have survived in the wilderness. The more they searched and failed to find her, the stronger Patricia's legal position became. Clara walked back to the forest, her mind working through implications. She could reveal herself, end this, claim her inheritance and start over. But that meant going back, facing her father, dealing with Patricia's manipulations, entering a world of solicitors and courts and documents. She looked at the forest around her, at the life she'd built. Hard, yes. Primitive, certainly. But it was hers. She'd survived on her own terms. Proved she didn't need their money or their house or their approval. The inheritance was substantial. Her mother had been careful with money. Life-changing wealth by any measure. But Clara had learned something in these frozen months. Wealth wasn't just money. It was also freedom, self-sufficiency, the knowledge that you could survive anything. She had that now. The forest had given her something worth more than her mother's trust fund. She returned to her cabin and sat by the fire, thinking. 3 months until her birthday. 3 months until Patricia's plans came to fruition. Clara smiled grimly. She'd survived this long. She could survive 3 more months. And then she'd decide whether to stay dead or come back from the grave. Either way, it would be her choice, not theirs. For the first time in her life, Clara Hartley was completely, utterly free. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. February brought the worst storms Clara had experienced. Wind screamed through the valley. Snow piled 6 feet deep. She spent days inside her cabin, venturing out only to maintain the fire and collect snow to melt for water. Her food stores dwindled. Hunting was impossible in the blizzards. She rationed carefully, eating 1 small meal per day, supplemented with pine needle tea and the last of her dried rabbit meat. She lost more weight. Her body consumed itself for fuel. But she endured. Late February, the storms broke. Clara emerged from her cabin to find the world transformed, pristine white, achingly beautiful, deadly silent. She checked her trap lines. Nothing. Animals were sheltering, waiting out the worst of winter just as she was. She was resetting a snare when she heard it, a cry for help, distant and desperate. Clara froze. Every instinct screamed at her to ignore it, stay hidden. But the cry came again, weaker. Someone was in trouble. She followed the sound to the ridge above her valley. There, collapsed in deep snow, she found 2 figures. Young men, early 20s, dressed in expensive hiking gear that was completely inadequate for Highland winter. Patricia's sons. Clara recognized them from rare family gatherings, James and Simon, cocky and entitled, who treated her with casual contempt. Now they were hypothermic, lost, Dying. Help, James managed through blue lips. Please, we're lost. So cold. Clara stared down at them. They didn't recognize her. How could they? She looked nothing like the girl they'd known. Just another hiker, perhaps. A miracle in the wilderness. She could walk away. Let nature take its course. They'd come looking for her on Patricia's orders, almost certainly. Searching for the inheritance that should be hers. Justice would be letting them freeze. But Clara had learned something in these months. She wasn't like them. Cruelty wasn't in her nature, even when it was deserved.
Get up, she said, her voice rough from disuse.
Both of you. Now. We can't. You can or you'll die. Your choice. Something in her voice, hard, commanding, utterly certain, made them move. They staggered upright. Follow me. Exactly. Step where I step. She led them down to her valley, to her cabin. Their eyes widened when they saw it. This impossible structure in the middle of nowhere, built by hand, clearly lived in. Inside. Strip off wet clothes. Wrap in these furs. Sit by the fire. They obeyed, too cold to question. Clara hung their wet gear to dry, assessed their condition. Moderate hypothermia, frostbite on fingers and toes, but survivable. She made them drink warm pine tea, fed them small amounts of rabbit stew. Too much too fast would make them sick. As warmth returned, James looked around the cabin with growing comprehension. Who are you? Someone who knows these hills better than you ever will. Did you build this? How? Quiet. Rest. You'll need strength for the walkout tomorrow. Simon was staring at her face, recognition slowly dawning. Wait. Clara. Clara Hartley. Clara met his eyes steadily. I was. Once. You're alive. Everyone thinks you're dead. They've been searching for months. I know. I've watched them search. They never looked in the right places. James was sitting up now, color returning to his face. You have to come back. Your father threw me out in November with nothing. Clara's voice was flat. Your mother insured it. And now she's searching for me because my 25th birthday is coming. Because she wants my inheritance. The brothers exchanged guilty looks. They knew. Of course they knew. It's not like that, James started. It's exactly like that. Clara stirred the fire. But I'm done with their games. I built this. Survived winter alone. Proved I don't need them or their money. So you'll just stay here? Forever. Simon looked horrified. Maybe. Haven't decided. They sat in silence, the fire crackling. Finally, James spoke. Our mother sent us to search. Said the inheritance should stay in the family. That you were probably dead anyway, and we should establish that. Honest, at least. Clara, I'm sorry. For how we treated you. How she treated you. You didn't deserve. No, I didn't. Clara looked at him. But it doesn't matter now. I've learned to survive without any of you. Morning came. Clara woke first, as always. She made food, gave them proper directions back to the main road. 8 miles through snow, but the weather had cleared. They'd make it. What do we tell them? Simon asked as they prepared to leave. Our mother. Your father. The police. Clara considered. Tell them you found evidence I'm alive. Surviving. But you don't know where. Tell them to stop searching. They won't find me unless I want to be found. And your birthday? The inheritance. I'll appear when I choose to. On my terms. She smiled coldly. Tell your mother Clara Hartley survived her exile. And when she returns, It won't be to beg for scraps. It'll be to claim what's rightfully hers. They left, stumbling through deep snow, looking back at the cabin that shouldn't exist. Clara watched them go. Then she returned to her valley, to her hidden home. She had 6 weeks until her 25th birthday. 6 weeks to decide her future. The forest had taught her self-reliance, strength, survival. But it had also taught her something else. She didn't have to choose between the wild and civilization. She could take what she'd learned here and build a different life, one where she owned her choices completely. Her mother's trust fund would let her buy land. Lots of land. Build a proper homestead, sustainable and remote. Live on her terms, not society's or Patricia's. The cabin in the forest was proof she could do it. On March 15th, Clara Hartley's 25th birthday, she walked into Invergary Police Station. Clean, dressed in clothes purchased with the last of her hoarded coins, looking fierce and healthy and utterly transformed. "I'm Clara Hartley," she told the shocked desk sergeant. "I understand people have been looking for me." The news spread like wildfire. The missing woman, alive. Survived winter in the Highlands alone. Built shelter. Lived off the land. Her father wept when he saw her. Patricia went white. Clara's solicitor was very clear. The trust fund was hers. The farmland was hers. All legally protected by her mother's will. Patricia's machinations had been for nothing. Richard begged forgiveness. Clara listened, her face unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "You made your choice, Dad. You chose her over me. Now I'm making mine." She didn't move back to the farm. She used the inheritance to buy 500 acres of highland forest, including the valley where her cabin stood. She hired builders to create a proper house, sustainable and off-grid, incorporating the lessons she'd learned. The hidden cabin remained, preserved as a reminder. Some winter nights, Clara slept there instead of her comfortable house, remembering what she'd endured. What she'd learned. She never spoke to Patricia again. Her father visited occasionally, their relationship forever changed by his betrayal. They were civil. Nothing more. Clara built a life of absolute independence. She taught wilderness survival courses, wrote a book about her experience, became quietly famous in outdoor communities. But her real life was the forest. The land she'd earned through suffering and strength. People asked if she was angry about being exiled. Clara always smiled and said, "They thought they were punishing me. Instead, they freed me." Because the girl who'd been thrown out with nothing had died in that forest. And someone stronger had been born in her place. Someone who belonged to no one but herself. The end.